I was sitting down there a few moments ago thinking about one of the difficulties of being a preacher, trying to concentrate on the Lord's Supper, of course. And my mind keeps going back to the lesson that I want to talk with you about today. It's very difficult to worship and preach at the same time. I'm glad to be speaking to you today. I want to talk with you for a little while about being a mother. Mother's Day is the day we're supposed to think about, but let me begin in the book of Proverbs, the 31st chapter. These are the words of King Lemuel. Verse 10, an excellent wife who can find, her worth is far above jewels. I skipped down to verse 30. Verse 29, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I read that, the entire passage, and I think about generations of godly women who've read that and gone away intimidated because it's not talking about you. This is the kind of thing you read in a Mother's Day card that's written at some time other than in the current moment. I don't know that this woman had ever gone out into the garage and screamed because two of her kids were sick and she hadn't had a decent night's sleep in a week. This is a woman who has never yelled at her husband or been yelled at by a husband. This is a woman who's imaginary, if you will. She rises early while it's still dark outside. She does all her work in the house, probably before breakfast, so she can fix for her family. This is a woman who is unreal. But she's presented to you as a role model, and she should be. This is something for us to aspire to, if you will. It's not natural to be this kind of woman. So let me skip over to the book of Titus, chapter 2, and read to you a couple of verses here. Verse 3, older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children. I read that because older women, and we have a number of them here, are to be good role models for the younger women so that they can learn to be role models for the next generation. And the next generation, I want you to teach them. This is not natural, I believe. We get married somewhere along through the years, and we're so in love that we forget there's a trick to learning how to love your man or your woman or your children. Because again, when you read the passages in the Bible that deal with family, it's like saying they're imaginary, they're not real like we are. The children are obedient to their parents and mine aren't. Or back in Proverbs 31, her children rise up and call her blessed. Do they do that when they might do it when they're 3 or 4. Mother, I love you, to get out of trouble. They won't say it usually when they're 13 or 14 because they're demanding their own way, their freedom. They may say it when they're 30. I get the idea that Proverbs 31 is written to older women. Your children will rise up and call you blessed, usually after they've left home and have established families of their own, and they have children, then they're going through the same struggles that you went through. But this is what it's like to be a mother. It's not easy. And yet many of you have done an excellent job of it. You are role models for younger generations. I want to suggest a few things to you. First of all, that women are civilizing. What advantage do they offer to society? They civilize us. I think men come along and we're just basic. I've got a house to live in. I don't want nails driven in the wall to hang pictures on, because that means it's going to have to be patched someday. Women are civilizing. They're going to decorate our house and our lives. Man discovered salt. Women came along and discovered pepper and paprika and cinnamon and garlic and all of these other things that spice life up. And I'm fairly certain that somewhere back through the years, Michelangelo's wife would have said, honey, I really need a painting to cover that big blank wall there. And they discovered art in that way. They civilize us. We need basics in life, but we need a little bit of spice to make it worthwhile at the same time. Women do that for us. They are also nurturing. What would happen if a child walked up to their dad and said, Dad, I mashed my finger and it's all bloody. Would you kiss and make it better? Nothing will happen. Because the father is going to look at him and say, get on out of here, I've got work to do. We go to our mother for headaches and heartaches and almost every other kind of ache there is. Now, I speak here in generalities, but generalities generalize. They're not absolute truth, but they are what we normally observe around us. God put men and women into this world to work together to bring about a harmonious family, a harmonious church, a harmonious everything. And sometimes we make it difficult by idealizing certain situations. A good wife would never do that. A good wife always does this. A good husband always does this. Do you get the idea that sometimes some of us are not good? I imagine back in Proverbs 31, that woman had the same conflicts that we do. But she is placed there. Here's a good part of her, and here's a good part of her, and here's a good part of her. And I'll come back later in the lesson and talk with you about the difficulties of life. I want to look at a few examples of mothers. Let me go back with you to the book of Exodus chapter 2. And we'll talk about the mother of Moses. Now, a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of the house of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket and covered it with pitch and tar, then put the child into it and set it among the reeds by the banks of the Nile, and his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. Now, this is, of course, the early years of Moses, and he turned out to be, well, the greatest prophet Israel had ever known. There has arisen one not like him since that time. Deuteronomy tells us in the 34th chapter. But I don't know that he started out that way. We've had a baby, and I want to look at the characteristics of this woman. She was a great woman of faith, and I think a great woman of trust at the same time. She had faith in God to look over her life, and mothers need that, and I trust that they find it, faith in God, but she had trust not just in God, but in Miriam, if she be the older sister here. Now, she looked at this baby and thought, this is a beautiful child. Have y'all ever seen an ugly baby? I have. I've seen kids that I thought, something's wrong with that one. She looked at it, and a face that only a mother could love. I don't know, she saw him, and I want to nurture this one. I can't give him up to be killed. I'm going to stick him in a basket and put it in the water, and somebody's going to come along and find it. But she stations Miriam there to look after the child and make sure that nothing bad happens to it. I don't know how long she had been. Now, do you think that this woman ever had an anxiety about things like that? Do you think Abraham going up to the mountain to offer Isaac ever had a reservation? If I do this, what's going to happen? How's God going to handle it? What's going to happen to this baby when I put him in the basket? Is he going to drown? Will the basket turn over? I'm sure she had the normal reservations that any of us would have. But she trusted God, and she trusted Miriam to watch over the child, to see. And do you think he ever rose up and called her blessed? She's going to take care of him for a couple of years. Pharaoh's daughter, of course, finds him and calls on the Hebrew woman to come be a nursemaid to her. And we kind of skip over all the rest of that interlude there. He's 40 years old when he goes out and sees a Hebrew being abused by an Israelite. And he kills the Egyptian rather, and basically runs away from home. He's left behind mother and father and family and everything else. And we don't see him much for the next 40 years until God calls him to be the great deliverer of the Israelite people. Did he ever rise up and call her blessed? I doubt if he had much of a chance. He's educated, of course, in the ways of the Egyptians. I don't know exactly what that means, what role Pharaoh had for him in his household. But I see this woman as a great woman of faith, a woman of courage, a woman of trust, who's going to do what she can to raise this boy in a godly fashion. Let me turn your attention for a moment to the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1. We're going to read there about Samuel. And in each of these illustrations, there are points that I want to make. I think Moses' mother was a great woman of faith and a great woman of trust. I see in this woman a great determination. There was a certain man from the hill country of Ephraim. His name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tuah, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah and the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children and Hannah had no children. Okay. One is going to give the other one a hard time. I've provided children for our husband and you haven't. And she ridicules her. You know, if it's up to Elkanah, I don't know that there would ever be a child born. I've got children already. I'm happy about that. No problems, no worries. Hannah is determined that she's going to have a child. And I see this great determination as being very impactful in the life of Samuel, who ends up being a great prophet of God. She is also a sacrificial woman. God, give me this boy, and I will teach him so much about you that he will be your servant, and I will dedicate him to you. And of course, she eventually takes him to the temple, turns him over to Eli at the time when he's weaned, and I don't know exactly when that is. I've known children to nurse through their 5th or 6th year, something like that. It could be that he's old enough to leave home and begin a life out in the world, and it could be 10 or 12, 14 years, something like that, before he's able to go out and be a man. Anyway, he's given to Eli, but he comes to Eli as a man of faith, as a man of devotion, as a man of dedication, because of his mother and what she did for him in the early years of his life. Have you ever heard that the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world? What can you do for a child when they are young to instill in them the ways of God? I don't know. I don't know exactly what she did, but he grew up believing in God and having a tremendous confidence in God's way. And he had that confidence. A woman of determination. I'm going to have a child. I'm going to dedicate this child to God. And I'm going to train him so thoroughly in his early years that it's going to last him the rest of his life. And that's what I see taking place in this passage. Now, I want to skip over for a moment to the book of 1 Kings, 1 Kings chapter 3. There is an episode here about two women who each have a child. And of course, they're bringing the children to Solomon, or the women are coming to Solomon with kind of a dispute. Let me begin with you in verse 16. Then two women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. One woman said, "Oh, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. And I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. It happened on the third day after I gave birth that this woman also gave birth to a child, and we were together, and there was no stranger with us in the house, only the two of us in the house. The woman's son died in the night because she lay on it. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your maidservant slept and laid him in her bosom and laid her dead son in my bosom. Then I rose in the morning to nurse my son. Behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him more carefully in the morning, behold, he was not my son whom I had born. Then the other woman said, no, the living one is my son. The dead one is your son. But the first woman said, no, for the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. And thus they spoke before the king. Then the king said, the one says, this is my son who is living, and your son who is dead. The other says, no, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one. And the king answered, get me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king, and the king said, divide the living child in two and give half of him to one mother and half to the other. And you've heard that story before. You've probably read it yourself a number of times. And we kind of wonder exactly what's going on here. How do you determine, if you're the king, if you're Solomon, whose child is this? Now, forget for a moment that they're harlots. Think of them as normal people. And we've all known of instances like this, where the child is sleeping in bed with the mother and the mother rolls over, and for some reason the child is suffocated. In a moment of panic, we don't know what to do. And a thought occurs. I'll just trade children. I've seen children in nurseries before in the hospital. They kind of look alike. I mean, they're little and they're bundled up, and all you can see is the front of their face. And some of you can distinguish from another, and some of them you can't. And how did you know that it's your child? Well, I don't know. I think a mother would know this perhaps better than a father would. I've seen this child. I've changed him. I've nursed him. I've done everything in the world for him up to this point. This is not my child. And that's not the part that concerns me about this. The part that concerns me is who he gives her to, the child to, is the deserving woman. Do you think all women deserve children? I think not. I've known all kinds of people through the years. Some became mothers and didn't want to, but they loved the child for all they were worth. Some have had children and didn't want them. How do you dispose of a child like that? Well, you, in our society, send them to babysitters, send them to an orphanage, send them somewhere just out of my sight. One of these women wanted a child. I don't know if she's the natural mother or not, but I know she had the sacrificial heart of a woman who was going to take care of her child, no matter what. She was the deserving woman. And that means a lot to me. I want to skip down for a moment to the book of Romans, the 16th chapter. There is another woman here that I run into. And for those of you who've heard me preach through the years, this is a meaningful passage to me. Romans 16, verse 13. Greet Rufus, a choice man in the Lord, and also his mother and mine. There is a woman here who is unnamed. I have no idea who she is. The mother of Rufus, probably not the mother of Paul, but she's adopted him. And this has happened to me and probably to most of you at one time or another. There can be a mother of a close friend of yours who just cares for children and young adults and all of that. And they come to mean a lot to you. And it means a lot to me here. I mean, I wonder, When Paul is beaten with whips, scourged, who took care of him? I don't see that as being a miraculous event where Paul is whipped and he's doing fine the next day. I see him needing care, needing nurturing, needing somebody to cook for him, somebody to launder his clothes, and somebody perhaps to make him fresh clothes and things like that. And this woman does that, like a mother would do for a son. What's her name? And I read through the Bible at all of these women, and men too, for that matter, who are not named for us. I mean, there's the Syrophoenician woman who brought a child to Jesus. There is the woman with an issue of blood. I don't know her name. She came before Jesus for a healing, and he complimented on her on her faith. You have great faith, be healed. And just so many men and women who came to Jesus for healing, and he did, and they're not named. And then the thought occurred to me that there are a number of people in the Bible that are one episode people. I mean, we don't read a great deal about it. We read some back in the adult class meets in the mini auditorium this morning about the judges. And some of them just have a verse. This man judged Israel for 20 years. What do you know about him? Absolutely nothing. I know what tribe he came from, and I know he judged them, and that's about all we know. Well, there are thousands of people in the book that I don't know anything about. Like this woman here, I don't know her name. I don't know where she came from. I don't know if she was married. I don't know how many kids she had. I just don't know. One episode. Does your life consist of one episode? Usually it doesn't. It's consisted for me of going on 76 years. That's scary. Some of those episodes have been real good. Some of them have been pretty bad. What kind of man am I? What kind of woman is the one we read about in Romans 13? I don't know. I know she helped Paul. Don't know anything else about her. Most of us are not one episode people. None of these people in the Bible are one episode people. They have a total life that's lived before God. And I see a number of characteristics shining forth that I'm persuaded are not one-time characteristics. A great faith, a great trust, a great love, a great devotion, a great spirit of sacrifice. If that's there, it's going to be there for years to come. Not just one moment in their life. And I want every one of us to rise up and call our mother blessed. I hope that you can. There are a lot of people who can't. We had a man at church a number of years ago, and I'd preached a similar lesson about mothers, and he said, I cannot honor my mother. His face was disfigured from the time she had beaten him when he was a child. She had broken bones. She had shattered his jaw. She had done all kinds of things, unspeakable things to that young man. He said, how can I honor her? She wasn't deserving. The people we look at here are. They are not perfect. And I want you to know that. I don't know of anybody who's been, well, I've had two people back through the years tell me they've never had an argument with their wife. One of them was exaggerating, the other one was crazy. That's just the bottom line. Ever had an argument with your husband? With your wife? If you've got one, you've had an argument with them. I'd almost guarantee that. Hopefully, it's not a lifetime of disagreement. I want us to be the kind of men and women that deserve the honor of our children, understanding that you're probably not going to get it until you leave home. Nita was gone last week. She came in with all kinds of gifts. Alan gave me this, Denny gave me this, or Brett gave me this, or Chad gave me this, and it's flowers and cards and time with the grandchildren. There's been a time when she wouldn't have been honored that way. We are normal. We are human. But we are godly people. And I want from Titus, the older women to be this, so that they can train the younger women to be this. Because if you don't present the picture of a godly woman, it's hard to convince somebody else to do that. And I just wanted you to think about this morning. And not read Proverbs and get so discouraged, because that's sure not talking about me. If you're a late sleeper, you still qualify. All of these people are in God's book as worthy examples for us. We'll be led in prayer at this time.